So welcome everybody to our gluten-free sourdough roll baking class. I am super excited for this because besides bread, what else do we often miss? It's rolls. And rolls that we can use for our hamburger rolls, for dinner rolls. This recipe you can actually modify and use for a sandwich loaf. There's so many different things that we can do with it that is different from our regular bowl. And it just complements our diet in a different way, especially when we know that what's out there in the store is not necessarily good, and then also not necessarily good for us. I always like to start these sessions with a meditation, but today I wanted to give two people a chance to speak. And one of them, Marina, is not able to make it, but she gave me permission to share with you what this bread baking experience has meant to her. And I wrote it down. She posted it yesterday to a small group of people on social media. And it just really touched my heart because it expressed what I felt and what I've always said, that there is a surface level of baking and gluten-free baking, but there is so much more to it. And I think her words express it really, really beautifully. And she said, when I bake bread, I can literally feel the peace that comes over me. It's as if I'm reconnecting with all the generations of women who came before me, all those who used to make bread for their families. There is something so grounding, so earthy in seeing dough come alive into a delicious, nourishing loaf of bread made with your own hands. And I just love that because I found out a little while ago that I come from a line of bakers. I knew that my grandmother and my aunt were really great bakers, but on a recent trip over the holidays, my mom shared with me what her mom did, how she baked sourdough bread for the family in, at that time, a big, town hearth, and how many women before her did the same thing. And bread is something that just nourishes us, and it is so much more. It can give us so much peace and being mindful in the moment, and just so able to fill us up besides what we can give out. So I really loved her words, and I thank her for that, and thank her for letting me share it. And Heidi, you've been with me for a very long time, and you have watched this journey, and I have baked bread for you ever since we started on this journey, but you just got a starter 2 weeks ago. Do you want to share the experience that you've had since you started baking?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Heidi. I am business bestie in all the ways to our beloved Waltrod here. I am a holistic health coach, and I support women on their journey of sharing their process and their work with the world. And I have been, here on these videos and watching all of this, and I've watched Waltrod make a bunch of loaves of bread and all the things and the discard recipes, and she's brought me loaves of bread when she comes to Maine to visit, and I was not ready to have a starter, and it was kind of intimidating and scary. And finally, when she was coming up here this past time, I was like, all right, bring me a starter. I think I can do it. And she brought me the starter, and it brought me into a portal. I was anxious and stressed and like, oh, the little baby Hugo and all the things. And we created a little like NICU for him under my microwave light to keep him toasty and warm. And he has just come in and made himself so present in my kitchen. And I too have been baking like crazy and giving away the bread, because let bread be thy medicine for sure. And everything in moderation, including moderation. So being mindful of how much grain and baked goods and things that we need. but I got to experience, like, over the last 2 years, as Waltrad's been creating these courses and offering these courses and doing all of this with the different groups of women and holding space for all these women to just care and maintain their starter. It can be really stressful, and I could feel my eyes start to roll back and the panic of I'm going to get it wrong or I'm going to break him, or all of the different emotions that come up. And so grateful to have Waltrad. This is what's so powerful about this work and what Waltrad has put together, to have Waltrod there, supporting me. No, you're okay. That's fine. Or what about this? And then going back to the instructions, then all of the modules and things that she has delivered over the time, and reading all the information and trusting myself to understand, and not getting it. Like, we can get really anxious and then our eyes roll back and then we can't comprehend the material. So I was really aware, as I've watched other women sort of go through that experience, I was very aware of it happening in my own body, and breathing in. And I think, as somebody who has been in a 12-step program for food, the scale was very stressful for me. Like, the scale can add another layer. And it brought me just getting quiet and staying embodied and listening in my mind and tuning into the meditations that Waltrad has given over the years, and remembering the sacredness. And as I'm weighing out flour on this scale that might as well be like crack or something, because it was something that I was, not supposed to be weighing and not supposed to be eating and all this stuff years ago. But Waltrad was like, but you're feeding him to nourish him, and you're feeding yourself to nourish yourself and to nourish your gut. And I always understood the sacredness of what we're doing here. But it wasn't until I really had a starter and was feeding the starter. And anytime I'm baking, like, the rest of the world just disappears. And I kind of go into like a quantum time bread making portal with all of my lineage and all my great grandmothers and all of that, to be in this space, to make this bread. And I play my sound bowl over the bread after I mix it, before I um, you know get it into the flour towel and all of that. And I just bring in my own medicine. And as I'm doing that, I'm healing myself, I'm healing my gut, I'm healing my process. And then I get to share all of that. As Danielle was saying, they feel that. And so when I share it with other women, I was at the beach yesterday with somebody who's not gluten free, and she just couldn't stop eating it. She's like, it's so good. And like, people can taste that and feel that medicine and that nourishment. And so it's been 2 weeks, and I've made 6 loaves of bread, I think is what we counted. And my last one was like so perfect. I went through the whole overproofing, underproofing, too hot of a starter, too cold of a starter, all the different humidity. I mean, it's a true science experiment, and we can get so caught up on having it perfect. But really, we just have to give ourselves permission. And that, like, I felt that so much. And so, um, and I've made scones, chocolate chip scones, blueberry lemon scones, and waffles with the discard, because I've been feeding him all. So I'm just so grateful and so inspired by this whole process, and to have watched you, Waltrod, and watched all the other women that you have supported through these different cohorts of this sourdough lab, um, and then to experience it myself, it's just been truly life changing. And I have so much more to say on it, but I will stop talking so we can start baking buns.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for sharing. I think what you shared is a sentiment that very many have felt, and it just brings forward the sacredness of it. So thank you. And to set the stage for where we're starting, I would like to invite you, as always, for just today a mini meditation, because we've talked, which we normally don't do. But as I always like to do that, is have you ground in, and hold on. So ground in, I like to do that with my bare feet on the ground. And if you could see my feet, I am literally barefoot, always in the kitchen, because I feel so connected to Mother Earth and to the sacred work that we are doing. So if you can, kick off your shoes, ground in, feel the ground, the floor beneath you, and close your eyes. If you'd like, you can put your hands in prayer position in front of your heart. And let's take 3 breaths in together. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And this first breath is always the biggest drop in my shoulders. So if you can drop your shoulders, do that. Now let's breathe in again through the nose and out through the mouth. And one last deep breath in through the nose and out through your mouth. Take one hand, put it on your chest, on your heart, and the other one on your soft belly, and allow your body, your nervous system to further relax. We'll take a minute to just scan our body and be aware, become aware of our surrounding, of the air that you may feel circulating on your arms. Maybe you can feel your muscles that are holding up your torso, the strength in your legs, your thighs, your calves, connection to the earth with your heels, your pads, your toes. Just be aware of you in this now space. We are here to nourish ourselves, to nourish each other, to bake gluten-free is truly alchemy. We are taking things that are completely separate and transforming them in something infused with love and healing to share with the people that are close to us, that are dear to us. And this is so different from running to the supermarket to grab a loaf that may not nourish us physically and emotionally. And I invite you to thank yourself quietly for showing up today, for taking that time, for doing this work, for deepening your skills, and for being here in this sacred circle with other women. Bow your head. Take your right hand, put it on your left shoulder, your left hand on your right shoulder. Give yourself a hug and appreciate and thank yourself for showing up no matter what's happening in your life. You're special and your work is special, and we need your presence on this planet. Another deep breath. Let your hands fall to your side, maybe shake them out a little bit. Wiggle your toes. And when you're ready, open your eyes. All right. I don't know how you feel, but it always helps me separate and create the special space. And with that, let's start making our levain. So we need a digital scale. And this process to make the rolls is a little different from some of the other processes, especially our beginner bread, which is a simple one-step process. For the rolls, we are using a two-step process where we create a levain, a pre-ferment before we make the actual dough. And there's a reason for that. The longer you ferment flour or anything, the deeper the flavor becomes, the more transformation happens in the flour, the easier it becomes to digest. And it creates a very fine crumb structure, which we actually want in rolls. And to get the soft rolls, we are using eggs and milk, either plant-based milk or dairy, whichever you prefer. But those are ingredients that I don't like to have at room temperature for a very long time. It technically is safe because the sourdough creates a very low pH, which creates a safe environment, but we don't want to have eggs and milk sit out at room temperature for a long period of time. So by creating a pre-ferment, we are cutting down the time that our eggs and milk are left at room temperature, and we are creating a finer crumb that we want for a small dinner roll. So that's the purpose behind it. And to get that started, it's actually very straightforward and fairly simple. It's kind of like feeding your starter, but different. Because when you feed your starter, you're not using all of your starter. When you create a pre-ferment, you're using the entire pre-ferment. So with this, we'll take a regular ceramic or glass bowl. And then we are measuring in, and I start with the sorghum flour, 40 grams of sorghum flour. And the reason why we measure, if you've been here with me for a while, you know, but if you're new, I just would like to remind you again, using volume is never accurate enough. And when it comes to sourdough baking, a few grams more or less actually can throw off your recipe. So we want to be really accurate and measure in weight and not in volume. So 40 grams of sorghum. Then we use 40 grams of ivory teff. And again, I have no affiliation with the flours, with the brands. I just love them for the way how they perform. And ivory teff happens to be a very nutritious grain. It has sort of the earthiness as buckwheat, but is not as strong. I would almost say it's not as loud. It's not dominating like buckwheat does. And you can have brown or ivory teff. I like for this one the ivory because it gives you the lighter color and it's even a little milder in flavor. So we take 40 grams of that. So we have now 80. And then we're going to take 80 grams of millet. Now I already pre-measured my millet because last night I wanted to quickly replenish my supplies because I forgot to order them online. And I found out that I can't get to my market because they decided to do road construction. So I couldn't get there. And I wanted to make sure for the class I had enough. But I also prepared dough for you to show you the whole process. And I needed to use a different millet. And some of you may know I like the Indian brand of millet, which is a different type of millet, which you will see in the dough that I prepared. It absorbs so much more moisture, and the whole pre-ferment was a lot denser than it is supposed to be. So this recipe is written for your average American millet, like the Arrowhead millet, for example, that brand. So why am I saying that? Because the brand matters. And for some reason, the regular American type millet is like yellowish, fine, but it doesn't absorb as much. So if you have a recipe, regardless where you get it from, and it doesn't perform right, it could have to do with the brand that you're using. So there is a difference. It may not be you or your skill. It's just knowing the flour that you're using. So this I measured out. This is the regular millet, 80 grams of that. So now we have 160 grams of flour. We use an equal amount of liquid, so water. We're measuring out 160 grams. And again, we're doing it by weight because if we do it by volume, it's A, not as accurate, and B, we already have the scale set up, so why not just measure it? And then we are using 80 grams of warm fat starter. So this is Agnes. She's a brown rice starter, and I fed her this morning. It's been now, 7 hours, and she has clearly doubled and started to collapse. So before we take any out, we stir it up. Then we measure out 80 grams. And at this point, this is your active starter that you're going to keep. So if you're new to working with sourdough, set this aside for now. When you're done preparing your dough, you want to take the 50 grams out, feed it with 50 grams flour, 60 grams water, stir it up, let it rise a little bit, like for an hour or two, and then refrigerate it if you don't use it, again, right away or within the next 24 hours. And then whatever is left of the active starter in there, you can put in a discard jar and use it for discard recipes. So that's just a side note. So let me show you what this looks like. This is a lot more dense than the dough will be. Just stir it up. And the millet and sorghum are fine grains that are really great when it comes to healing the gut. So they are two flours that I really love to use in bread baking. They are fairly hardy and strong, but not as strong as buckwheat or teff. And they give a nice crumb, give us some healing properties, and they're just overall really great to bake with. All right, so this is the consistency we're going for. It's kind of thick, not really strong and dense, but fairly thick dough. So we are setting this aside. You want to make sure everything stays in there. So we'll get it off our spoon. And then we'll cover this because you don't want it to dry out. I just use some saran wrap because that gives us the flexibility of having any gases that build up to escape. So we'll just loosely cover that so it doesn't dry out. And then you'll take a trivet if you have stone countertops, put it underneath and let this ferment for about 6 to 8 hours. So it depends on your room temperature. My kitchen right now with the oven heating up is 77.5 degrees. So this is probably ready in 5 hours or less, but usually it's sort of 6 to 8 hours that it takes for it to ferment. Now I've prepared one already early this morning, and you can see the difference. We are going to use this one in the main dough. And I don't know if you can see that. It has almost, the surface looks like a cracked, dried out soil, but it's very liquid. It's more liquid than the one that we just made because the fermentation liquefies it. And when you stir it, you can see it's like mousse, and then there's a lot of liquid underneath. So this is a perfectly fermented levain or pre-ferment. You can stir it up, and then later this goes into our main dough. So let me set this aside. Let's get started with making our main dough. I like to use my my KitchenAid. What am I seeing here? Oh, that. You can mix it by hand, but it's just so much easier to use the equipment when you have it. So with this, we'll start with 130 grams of oat flour. And oat will give us the softness as well. So it's a great flour. It's gluten-free, certified gluten-free, and it gives us the soft dinner-like consistency. We'll take 130 grams of that. And I like to section it in my bowl, because if I get a little too much, it's a lot easier to remove it than if we just put everything in the middle. It's like I did now. I got some extra in here. So this is perfect. 130. And then we add our starches. So arrowroot gives it a very light consistency. It's slightly different from potato starch. I prefer arrowroot in this recipe. If you don't have it, you can use potato starch. We're going to use 60 grams of arrowroot. Now I'll just put it next to the oat flour in case I go over. I can just scoop it back out. Right, perfect. And then tapioca. And each starch behaves slightly differently. So there is a reason why we use two different types of starches. So 80 grams of tapioca. Could you use the same in a pinch? Yes, you could. But if you want the real consistency and crumb the way you expect it, then you have to go with the different starches. Each flour, each starch has a different role to play in all of the recipes. And next we're using flax seeds. So flax seeds help us bind it together, because remember, with gluten-free, we don't have gluten, which is the binding structure. So I grind my own flax seeds. They're just regular brown flax seeds, because they turn rancid very quickly. So I already did that ahead of time, and I just use a coffee mill for it that I exclusively use to grind flour, seeds, spices, anything that I need in small amounts. I use that for. Then 15 grams of psyllium husk. So if you've been baking with me for a while, you know that I don't like psyllium husk. It is the darling right now of everybody that's baking gluten-free, because it makes working with the dough so much easier. But there's a flip side. It makes your stuff go stale very quickly. And for people with digestive issues, they really have a hard time digesting it. So I like to either eliminate it completely or keep it to a minimum. Here we're need to keep it to a minimum, because we want to be able to form our rolls later. Now, if we would only rely on xanthan gum, our dough would be too liquid and it will completely spread out. So we need some psyllium husk to hold the dough together. But I like to find in my recipe exactly that line where it's still workable, but not so much that they don't turn stale within 12 to 24 hours. So these rolls will last for about 2 to 3 days before they start to get a little harder and you know, stale tasting. So we'll take 15 grams. Okay. And then the xanthan gum. For me personally, it's easier to digest. I know some others have a harder time with xanthan gum. In that case, you can do all psyllium husk, knowing what the flip side is. You usually say half the amount of psyllium gum you can replace with xanthan gum. So let's say if a recipe calls for 10 grams of psyllium husk, you could use 5 grams of xanthan gum, provided that you will bake whatever you're making in a form, like in a muffin tin or in a loaf pan or something. If it's something that needs to hold its own shape, like the rolls, it's not such a good idea to do that. Okay, 8 grams. And then we'll take 8 grams of salt. I'm using pink Himalayan salt. You can use regular table salt, whatever you prefer. So that's, oh, and the raw sugar. I like to use the raw sugar because it at least gives us a little bit of minerals while it's still sugar, but it helps us with the fermentation process. And you can't really taste it in the sense that they're not sweet, but they have just a little deeper flavor. 20 grams of that. Or and then I like to use my silicone spatula and just mix it all up. I want to really distribute it finely, because when you put this on in your KitchenAid, it just doesn't do that well of a job. So once it's all mixed, it should be all like, I can't think of the name right now. Uniform, thank you. All right, so that's what it looks like. And then we'll make a well in the middle. That's where our liquid is going. 1 egg at room temperature. The extra virgin olive oil. I do not like to bake or use any of the grain oils. Olive oil, I think, gives it a great flavor. It's healthy. And it helps the rolls or the bread to stay fresh longer. So 20 grams of that. You have some extra, I like to put it on my hands. And then 175 grams of filtered water. Okay. And then today we're using the milk. My favorite plant-based milk is Khalifa. The reason why we don't just use only water is because I just got a text that it just threw me off here for a second. Is because it gives us that softness of a roll. So we could use all water instead, but the roll will feel different. So we'll take 150 of the Khalifa or any other plant or dairy milk that you have. Neat. And then we need to add all of our levain. And do not forget it, because I have done that. I'm so focused on the recipe and forget that there's a whole pre-ferment that needs to go in. Try to get as much as possible in. So that's when your silicone spatula comes handy. Everything is off my spoon, and let's get everything out of the bowl. There's at least 10-15 grams left in the bowl if I wouldn't scoop it all out. All right, so everything is in. Our liquids, our solid, dry ingredients. Now let's put it in our KitchenAid. And for that, I like to use the dough hook. And just start off on a low speed. So I'm going to stop it a couple times, because if I just let it run, and if you do it at home, just let your mixer run. But I don't want you to watch me for 10 minutes watching the KitchenAid. You want to scrape down the sides. I don't know about yours, but mine always leaves some flour behind on the sides and on the bottom. So I like to scrape it up and just keep running it until we get a really smooth dough. So it's really hard for me to hear you. You may not hear the mixer running. Otherwise, I say, let's do a Q&A, but it is really loud next to it. So if there's anything that came to mind, just put it in the chat so we don't forget to answer any questions. Coming together nicely. And you may see in some recipes that you can find that they ask to activate the psyllium husk if they're using psyllium husk in their recipes. The way I do it, by mixing it in with all the flours, it distributes it finely. You don't get any of that those gel pockets that you get otherwise. And I think it's just a much easier, cleaner method. And there's a difference between psyllium husk and psyllium husk powder. They are not equal. The psyllium husk powder absorbs a lot more moisture, so it will throw off your recipe. If for whatever reason a recipe calls for powder, then grind it in your spice mill and stick with it. Don't just substitute one for the other. It does perform completely differently. So let's start this up one more time. All right, so this is close enough for us here. As I said, if you do it at home, give it the full amount of time because it gets really, really silky. And I'm going to show you in a second what it looks like. So this is not quite as silky yet, but as I said, I don't want you to watch me watch the KitchenAid. So we'll get all the dough off the hook. So this is what the dough looks like. It's actually super sticky, but it has structure, and that structure comes from the psyllium husk. So if you've been baking bread with me, you will feel, and that's the thing, you want to feel the dough. You will feel that there's more resistance. It's more elastic. But again, we need that to be able to form our rolls later. Now, normally we would let this ferment, but with rolls, we're going to do it differently. We are going to form the rolls and then do the dough ferment instead of fermenting the dough and then forming the rolls. Reason being is when you first let the dough ferment and then form your rolls, you're compacting it again, and you're running the risk that your rolls get very dense and sticky, and you don't get the airiness that you want from a roll. So this time, we're going to do that, as I said, to form the rolls first. If you would turn it into a loaf bread, you would put it at this point in your loaf form. So we'll line this with parchment paper. And now the question is, how do we turn this sticky mess into rolls? So you have two choices. You can do it by hand. I would recommend you wear gloves and you put some oil on your hands. Or you could do what I figured out was use a cookie or ice cream scoop. Now this is a professional cookie scoop. It's a 2-ounce scoop, which makes just the perfect size in my opinion, but it still sticks to the scoop. So here's what I do. I take a bowl, have some water in it to dunk my scoop between scooping out the dough, but on top is a layer of olive oil. Because we want to brush them with olive oil anyway, but by putting it on top, we are coating the scoop. So now it has water and olive oil on it. It makes it so much easier to scoop out the dough. And then in turn, get the olive oil already on top of the roll so we don't have to brush them. So you just scoop it out, roll it out like this, and put it on your cookie sheet. And this amount of dough, oh, I forgot to scoop them, and here we go, sticky mess. And with this amount of dough, we should get 12 rolls. So the very first time I tried to make rolls, I did it, of course, the way that everybody does. I got my gloves on, I floured my hands, then eventually I put oil on my hands, and the dough was everywhere, but not where I wanted it to be. And then I'm like, okay, there must be an easier way. And that's when I realized, well, I have cookie scoops. Why not use those? I just wanted to make sure that not too much of the oil and water gets stuck on your dough. And you can form them a little bit later once you have them all measured out. So here I have a little bit of flour left that wasn't picked up on the bottom, so we'll fix that. So again, this is super sticky. I take a silicone spatula, dunk it in the same water. I have the oil on it, and that allows me to just shape them a little bit easier instead of using my fingers. You can't really roll them like a traditional roll with your hands. I'm just going to take a moment here to shape them a little better, because the dough doesn't run when you bake it. It pretty much keeps the shape. You can flatten them if you'd like a little bit more of a flatter hamburger roll. If you want them larger, you can do that. I have made them the same amount of dough into just 9 rolls, so they got much bigger. But the 12 for me is just the perfect size, but I leave that up to you. You may have to adjust the temperature, or at the time, I should say, not the temperature, the time that you use to bake them. As with bread, we want an internal temperature of 210 degrees. So if you have a meat thermometer or a thermometer that lets you read internal temperature pretty instantly, take the temperature just before you take it out and make sure it's at the 210, so they're really baked through. For the longest time, I would do the, the knock test. You turn it over, you knock on the bottom. If it sounds hollow, it's done. But I find it's really not accurate, and especially when we make bread, sometimes I would take it out just a few minutes too early. So now I rely on the thermometer to make sure that everything that I bake with sourdough is really baked through. All right. So now all of these are coated with some oil and water. And now we can cover them with some saran wrap and make sure that they don't dry out while they ferment. So in my kitchen, usually it takes 2 hours. But because it is so warm, we are now at 78.5, it may be an hour and a half by the time they're already proofed. And I'll show you what they will look like when they are proofed. So I made these 2 hours ago. I don't know if you can see them. They are bigger and puffier than these. So these are the ones we just made. These are the ones that were proofed. So same scoop, same size. They don't grow a whole lot, but as I said, they get puffier, they get airier. So I'm just going to try and see. Can you guys see it? All right. So my oven is at 375. I can take the cover off. There is nothing else that we need to do. I'm just going to cover up the ones that we just made. And then I'll show you a little trick how we can get extra oven rise with the rolls. We don't need to do that with our breads, but with the rolls here, it makes a difference. So these are covered with a little bit of plastic wrap. I'm going to set them aside and they can do its thing for the next hour and a half. And let me see if I'm going to move this closer. So you can see my oven. And I need my ice cubes. So sorry for that. All right, turn the light on. We'll put these at the middle rack. And we want to have steam in there, which we don't need when we use the Dutch oven. So I'm using 4 to 5 ice cubes and throw them in. And a little bit of water. And as soon as I do that, I create steam. And that's what we want. We want some extra steam in there for our rolls to rise. So we'll set a timer for 30 minutes because that's how long they take in my oven. And as I said, check your oven. The internal temperature of your rolls, you want to go to 210. And so that could be 25 minutes, could be 35 minutes, depending on your oven. But yeah, in a half an hour, it's done. If you turn this into a loaf, if you want to make a sandwich loaf, you would obviously not form rolls. You would line your pan because it is sticky. Put in the dough, let it rise for about the same amount of time, 2 hours, 2.5, whatever it takes to just get airy. And then it takes about 60 to 65 minutes at 375 to bake. And you would do the same thing with the ice cubes and the water. It just creates a moist environment that allows the dough to expand before the crust forms, which means once the crust forms, it's very hard for the roll to rise and expand or for a bread to rise and expand. So we are creating this artificial steamy environment for the rolls. So Heidi, do we have any questions?
There are no questions at this time. I just have to say, I think your water dipping oil cookie scoop is brilliant. That worked like a charm. I was so impressed to see how easily that came off.
Thank you.
And the water ice cubes steam bath thing is super fun too. Your innovation and creativity is just beyond. So really, really cool. Do you have one handy? Can you show us one? Like, you don't have any fresh? No.
I ate the last one for breakfast.
Good for you. Well, then we'll have to be in the cafe
Yes.
Boxer group, and you can share in there. I'm just curious to see like what they look like in the middle and stuff. So
yeah, no, I'm going, once they are done, I will film it and I will just add it to the video here so everybody can see what they're supposed to look like at the end.
Amazing, amazing.
All right, our rolls are ready. They have been in the oven for 30 minutes. And they cooled down a little bit, so let me show them to you. Here they are, and I'm not going to tip it, otherwise they're gonna run all over the place. But I am gonna show you what they look like on the inside, because they're really nice and fluffy, and they're still a little warm. So let's, oh my God, nice and crunchy on the outside. All right, here, take a look. Ooh, nice and fluffy. So let's have a bite. Mmm, so good. Just a little bit of crunch on the outside because they are supposed to be soft dinner rolls. So a little bit of crunch, but super soft on the inside. So good. So let me know if you try them, how they come out for you. And if you have a picture, I always like to see pictures. So thank you so much and happy baking. Bye.